In the quiet folds of time, where memory softens and the edges of history blur into dream, there exist practices so ancient, so profound, that they seem to hum with a secret energy, audible only to those who pause long enough to listen. The world of antiquity was a landscape not merely of stone and soil, but of desires, fears, and symbols. Among these symbols, few are as enigmatic and yet as undeniable as the phallus. Colossal, sculpted, sometimes carved into the earth itself, or raised in sanctuaries that now lie buried beneath layers of dust and centuries, these giant phalluses were never mere representations of anatomy. They were vessels of belief, conduits of unseen power, talismans of creation and destruction. In the soft cadence of history, it is clear that to understand why entire cultures erected these monumental forms, we must first enter the quiet corridors of their imaginations, their rituals, and the hushed tones of their spiritual lives. Long before cities grew from the banks of rivers, long before empires draped themselves across continents in the names of kings and gods, human beings understood life as an intricate web of unseen energies. Fertility was not simply the ability to bear children, but a cosmic principle, a pulse that moved through the land, the sky, the rivers, and the human body alike. To see the phallus as sacred was to see life itself, and all its generative potential, laid bare and honored. In these early societies, stone and wood became language, sculpted forms spoke louder than words. The phallus, rising from the earth, often alongside depictions of the vulva or paired with symbols of lunar and solar forces, was an emblem of both the tangible and the ineffable. It was at once provocative and meditative, shocking to the modern gaze yet wholly natural to those who shaped it with reverent hands. Imagine walking through a forest in prehistory. The air is dense with mist, the scent of damp earth and flowering plants rising to mingle with the smoke of ritual fires. Among the trees, there are figures, monolithic, carved from stone that has known centuries of wind and rain. Some are upright and proud, reaching toward the sky, their forms exaggerated, monumental, impossible to ignore. Others are paired, entwined with shapes that echo the curves of the feminine, suggesting a dialogue between forces we can only begin to comprehend. The people who lived here did not separate the spiritual from the sexual in the ways we do. Creation, in their world, was a continuous loop, the birth of a child, the ripening of a crop, the rise of the sun, the turning of the seasons. Each phallic monument was a node in this loop, a place where humans could commune with the hidden threads of existence. Archaeologists and historians often attempt to impose order upon these ancient objects, to classify them, to situate them within a framework of rituals or fertility rites. Yet when we approach these relics not as static artifacts but as living echoes, we begin to sense a different rhythm. These enormous phalluses, whether found in the remote valleys of Anatolia, the lush plains of Minoan Crete, or the shadowed temples of South Asia, radiate an energy that transcends the purely physical. Their placement, often on elevated ground or along sacred pathways, suggests they were meant to be seen, approached, contemplated. Some were touched, rubbed with oils or adorned with garlands. Others were framed with offerings, small votive figures, or the detritus of daily life, left as tokens to invite the blessing of abundance. The act of worship, of honoring the phallus, was a practice of attunement, a way of aligning human consciousness with the unseen forces of generativity that govern both body and cosmos. There is a subtle eeriness in the silence of these spaces, an aura that is difficult to articulate. Stand before one, even in imagination, and the mind begins to slip from linear thought. The modern impulse is to categorize, to define, to explain. But the ancient mind knew that some truths are not meant to be dissected, only experienced. The phallus, enormous, imposing, sometimes grotesque, demands attention, yes, but also contemplation. It asks the observer to feel as well as to think, to sense the resonance between the human form and the forces that shape the universe. To worship the phallus was not merely to acknowledge sexuality, it was to acknowledge existence itself. Birth, death, growth, decay, renewal, each was mirrored in the curve of stone, the slope of a mound, the sharp rise of a sculpted shaft. Histories whisper that these practices were far from uniform. In some regions, phallic worship was integrated with elaborate rituals involving music, chant, and dance, the human body moving in imitation of the forces the monuments represented. In others, the approach was quieter, more meditative, a communion of one with the vast, unseen patterns of creation. And in all cases, there was a recognition of power, power that was both constructive and destructive, intimate and cosmic. The phallus was a vessel, yes, but also a threshold. It was a point of passage between what is seen and what is felt, between the tangible world of flesh and the intangible world of energy and spirit. To understand why humans have so consistently been drawn to monumental phalluses, we must also consider the psychological landscape of the ancients. Their worlds were precarious, their lives shaped by the whims of climate, the fertility of soil, the migration of animals, and the unpredictable whims of gods who demanded attention. The phallus, as a symbol of generation and potency, offered a focal point for hope, protection, and continuity. A giant carved stone could contain the anxieties of an entire community, embodying in its presence the promise that life would persist, that the cycle of growth would endure. To worship it was to participate in a ritual of cosmic maintenance, to ensure that the threads of existence remained intact. Yet, there is also a darker aspect, a shadow lurking behind the reverent gestures and ceremonial offerings. Phallic monuments, particularly those of extraordinary size, carry an inherent tension. They are reminders of human mortality, the fleeting nature of life, and the paradox of creation, that birth cannot exist without eventual decay, that power is fleeting, that even the forces we attempt to honor are ultimately beyond our control. In the stillness of the night, the sight of one of these colossal forms, isolated upon a hill or hidden within a temple, evokes a strange mixture of awe and unease. It is a meditation on limits and infinitude, on the intersection of desire and fear, of reverence and terror. The ancients understood this intuitively. Their rituals often included both celebration and warning, joy and somber reflection, a duality that the modern world has largely forgotten. Consider, for a moment, the silent testimony of stone. Over millennia, wind, rain, and the slow march of time have worn the edges of even the largest monuments. Yet the forms remain, and in them, the human impulse toward understanding the sacred is tangible. In a world without written records, without photographs or digital memories, these shapes were stories. They told of what mattered most, the mystery of life itself, the interplay between seen and unseen forces, and the power of humans to engage with those forces through imagination, ritual, and symbol. Each contour, each line, each exaggeration in scale was intentional, a deliberate act of meaning-making that transcended the individual and spoke to the collective consciousness of a people. As we drift through these thoughts, imagining ourselves walking among the stones, we begin to perceive the faint pulse that persists across time. It is the rhythm of fertility, of creation, of reverence. It is the echo of chants, of footsteps upon sacred ground, of offerings placed with care, of hands brushing against cool, smooth surfaces, of eyes lifted to the sky. In this quiet meditation, we glimpse the continuity between human desire and cosmic law, the deep recognition that life, in all its forms, is a miracle to be honored. And in that recognition, there is both serenity and unease. Serenity, because we sense a connection that spans millennia; unease, because we are reminded that this connection is vast, mysterious, and beyond full comprehension. Even now, in the modern world, the influence of these practices persists, though often in muted, unconscious ways. The fascination with fertility symbols, the allure of sexual iconography, the continued use of ritual to mark passages of life, all are echoes of an ancient consciousness that sought to navigate the mysteries of existence through symbol and devotion. The giant phalluses of the past were not merely objects, they were living extensions of belief, embodiments of the human desire to touch the infinite, to honor creation, and to confront mortality. Their enormity was intentional, a reminder that some truths are too vast for the ordinary scale of daily life, and that some experiences demand that we stand, silent, in their presence, and listen. As the night deepens, as the mind drifts between thought and dream, the phallic monuments of antiquity become more than stone. They are thresholds, portals into a consciousness that does not distinguish between the sacred and the erotic, between fear and reverence, between life and the endless unfolding of time. In contemplating them, we enter a space where history, myth, and imagination converge. Here, in this meditative state, it is possible to feel the pulse of countless generations who have walked these same paths, raised their voices in song or prayer, and touched the forms that spoke of creation itself. The prologue of our journey into the ancient secrets of sex, of worship, of the enormous and the uncanny, begins not with explanation, but with presence. Let the mind slow, the breath deepen, the attention drift. Imagine the fog of early morning lifting over a sacred valley, the monumental phallus rising from the earth, its shadow stretching long and impossible across the landscape. Imagine the faint murmur of ritual, the rustle of garments, the soft scent of offerings carried by the wind. Let the feeling seep in, a hypnotic blend of wonder, awe, and subtle disquiet. This is the world the ancients inhabited, and this is the lens through which we must now begin to view their extraordinary and unsettling devotion. In the lingering silence of these ancient landscapes, there is a quality of attention that modern eyes rarely perceive. The stones, carved by hands long turned to dust, seem to breathe in the rhythm of time itself. Imagine walking barefoot along the earthen paths, feeling the subtle contours of the land, the vibration of the ground beneath your feet. The colossal phalluses, rising abruptly from the soil, dominate the horizon in a way that is both comforting and disquieting. Their size is a constant reminder of human vulnerability, of the smallness of the individual in the face of generative forces that operate on scales far beyond comprehension. And yet, paradoxically, these monuments are also intimate. They invite touch, observation, contemplation, and, most profoundly, reflection. In some regions, these towering forms were carved from volcanic rock, imperishable and enduring, a testament to human foresight and reverence. In others, they were crafted from softer stone, wood, or even clay, materials more vulnerable to time and weather, yet infused with the care of artisans who understood that impermanence was itself a form of truth. Each curve, each exaggerated feature, was not simply an anatomical reproduction but a deliberate abstraction, a language of symbolism meant to convey potency, fertility, and the mysteries of life. These shapes were mirrors of existence, and the act of erecting them was a meditation, a prayer, and a gesture of both devotion and defiance, devotion to the unseen forces that govern growth and decay, and defiance against the inevitable passage of time that would erode their form and, eventually, the memory of those who built them. It is important to imagine the cultural and spiritual landscape that surrounded these monuments. Communities often clustered around sacred sites, living in proximity to the stones, offering daily attention through ritual, song, or quiet reflection. The phallus was not merely a sculpture but a hub of human experience, a locus where the mundane and the divine intertwined. Festivals were held to honor these forms, with processions that moved in slow, deliberate patterns, echoing the movements of celestial bodies. The rising and setting sun, the cycles of the moon, the patterns of the stars, these were observed and celebrated, their rhythms mirrored in the choreography of human devotion. The phallic monuments acted as anchors in this intricate lattice of meaning, drawing people together, connecting them to the natural world, and offering a tangible interface with forces that could otherwise seem abstract, distant, or terrifying. The fascination with monumental phalluses extended beyond mere fertility or reproduction. In some traditions, the phallus symbolized authority and power, a concentration of generative energy that could influence the fate of a community, the success of a harvest, or the outcome of conflict. In this sense, worship was a form of negotiation, a way for humans to engage with forces larger than themselves, to channel desires into symbolic form, and to seek alignment with patterns that govern both the human and natural worlds. The interplay of sex, power, and spirituality was never crude or casual in these contexts. It was subtle, deliberate, and often shrouded in ritualized mystery. To touch, observe, or even approach a phallic monument was to enter a liminal space, a threshold where ordinary reality faded and the deeper truths of existence came into focus. There is, too, a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. The ancient mind was attuned to symbols, to patterns, to the resonance of shape and scale. A giant phallus was not simply a representation of the human organ, it was an amplification, a magnification of energy and intention. Its enormity suggested that the forces it represented were not bound by ordinary human limitations. By engaging with the monument, through touch, sight, or ritual, ancient people could feel a sense of connection to a power that was both terrifying and comforting. They understood that life's mysteries could not be mastered, only honored, and that the act of veneration itself was transformative. In the stillness before the monument, in the hush of dawn or the deep shadows of twilight, one could sense a subtle pulse, a vibration that transcended language and logic, carrying the mind into a meditative state where thought and feeling merged. Consider, too, the aesthetic and symbolic choices made in the creation of these forms. Some phalluses were smooth, their lines flowing with a naturalistic grace that mimicked the human body while simultaneously exaggerating its generative power. Others were adorned with intricate carvings, inscriptions, or geometric patterns, each symbol adding layers of meaning, suggesting connections to cosmic cycles, agricultural processes, or mythic narratives. In some cases, accompanying statues or reliefs depicted humans in states of offering, embrace, or ecstatic movement, reinforcing the notion that the phallus was a point of intersection between the mortal and the divine. The ancients were masters of narrative through form, understanding that a shape could convey more than words, that a monument could embody both the tangible and the ineffable, the temporal and the eternal. Yet, despite their prominence, these monuments were often approached with a mixture of reverence and caution. Inscriptions and oral traditions warn of the consequences of disrespect, suggesting that the phallus carried not only blessing but judgment. This duality, fertility and destruction, creation and mortality, is central to understanding their significance. The human mind, attuned to cycles of birth and decay, could interpret the monument as a reflection of life's paradoxes. Standing in its shadow, one might feel both empowered and humbled, drawn into a meditative state where the boundaries between self and cosmos seem to dissolve. Here, in this suspended space, the ancient observer could contemplate the mysteries of existence, the ephemeral nature of life, and the continuity of generative forces that persist long after individual lives have ended. It is impossible, of course, to fully reconstruct the experience of ancient worshippers. We can study their artifacts, their rituals, and their myths, but the sensation of standing before a massive, sacred phallus, feeling its presence, observing the reactions of a community in ritualized communion, this cannot be captured fully in words. And yet, in attempting to imagine it, we engage in our own act of meditation, entering the space between history and dream. Let the mind drift over valleys where these monuments once stood, across riverbeds and mountain ridges, imagining the soft light of dawn revealing their forms, the quiet murmur of ritual chants rising from distant villages, the faint scent of incense or herbs drifting through the air. Each sensory element is a thread, weaving the modern observer into the tapestry of ancient consciousness. As night falls and shadows lengthen, the sense of mystery deepens. The phallic monuments of antiquity were never intended to be fully understood in the rational sense. They were thresholds, portals, conduits, inviting humans to confront the tension between the known and the unknown, the corporeal and the spiritual, the intimate and the infinite. To approach one is to engage in a form of contemplative surrender, to acknowledge that some truths are not grasped, only felt, and that wisdom often lies in the willingness to dwell within uncertainty. In this quiet surrender, there is both comfort and subtle unease, a hypnotic duality that mirrors the cycle of life itself. Even as modern viewers, removed by millennia from the practices and beliefs that gave rise to these forms, we can sense their resonance. The fascination with fertility, sexuality, creation, and generative energy persists, embedded in the subconscious, echoing through art, ritual, and cultural memory. The monumental phallus becomes a lens through which to examine human desire, the longing for connection with forces larger than ourselves, and the recognition that existence is at once fragile and potent, fleeting and eternal. By contemplating these ancient symbols, by allowing the mind to move slowly through their history, their context, and their presence, we enter a space of meditation, of reflection, and of subtle awakening. And so, let the mind drift, the breath deepen, and the imagination wander along the faint trails left by those who first encountered these monolithic forms. Hear the soft whisper of stone against wind, the imagined echo of ritual song, the faint heartbeat of a community attuned to the rhythms of earth and sky. In this quiet, meditative space, we begin our journey into the ancient secrets of sex, into the uncanny and enigmatic worship of giant phalluses, and into the liminal realm where history, myth, and dream converge. Here, in this suspended twilight of understanding, the story unfolds, inviting the listener to drift deeper into contemplation, to feel the pulse of the past, and to awaken to the subtle, hypnotic mysteries of human devotion. Long before written records traced the paths of kings and empires, before cities rose in geometric precision along rivers and valleys, there existed a deeper, quieter devotion, the worship of the generative forces of life. In this epoch, human beings understood the world not as a collection of objects to be catalogued, but as a living organism, each part infused with vitality and intention. Life itself was a complex interplay of energies, and the phallus, monumental, exaggerated, often grotesquely so, stood at the very center of this understanding. To see it, to approach it, was to witness the axis upon which creation turned, the silent pulse that connected earth, sky, and human consciousness. In regions now obscured by centuries of soil and forest, archaeologists have uncovered these phallic forms in surprising abundance. Stone obelisks rise from what were once sacred groves. Wooden carvings, long decomposed yet traceable through soil impressions, hint at rituals performed under the veil of night. Clay models, sometimes buried beneath ceremonial floors, suggest intimate acts of devotion, both public and private. The variety of these forms, while astonishing, underscores a singular truth: human fascination with generative power is universal. Across cultures and continents, the phallus was more than an organ, it was a vessel of transcendence. Each society, in its own symbolic language, sought to capture the invisible currents of life, to honor and invoke them, to make tangible the forces that govern birth, growth, and renewal. Imagine standing in a remote valley, centuries before our time, the morning fog curling around monolithic forms carved into the hillsides. The air is dense with the scent of earth and vegetation, the soft vibration of rivers flowing in the distance. A colossal phallus rises before you, carved from stone smoothed by wind and rain, its surface catching the faint light of dawn. The edges of the monument are deliberate, exaggerated, designed not for anatomical accuracy but for effect, an amplification of generative power that commands attention and contemplation. The monument is not alone. Smaller stones lie in circles or lines around it, perhaps marking processional routes, perhaps representing the cycles of the moon and sun. The landscape itself becomes part of the ritual, a canvas upon which human devotion is inscribed in stone and soil. To worship such a form was not mere indulgence in sexuality, it was a sophisticated meditation on existence itself. Early humans recognized that the generative force represented by the phallus was not simply reproductive but cosmic, linking human life with the cycles of the natural world. Fertility of crops, the flowing of rivers, the movement of celestial bodies, all were part of a single, integrated system, and the phallus served as both symbol and conduit. Rituals were carefully structured, designed to align the human body with these forces. Chants, dances, and offerings were not arbitrary, they were reflections of the rhythms observed in the sky and the soil. Movement mirrored growth, song echoed the cycles of life, offerings were tangible gestures acknowledging the unseen currents that shaped existence. The monumental scale of these phallic forms suggests a psychological and spiritual strategy. By enlarging the familiar into the extraordinary, ancient peoples created a sense of awe, a suspension of ordinary thought that allowed them to confront forces beyond their comprehension. In this, the monuments functioned as portals, thresholds between the mortal and the divine. To touch the stone, to stand in its shadow, was to engage in a dialogue with the invisible, to sense the pulse of creation itself. Some forms were solitary, isolated on hills or plateaus, emphasizing the grandeur and isolation of the forces they represented. Others were grouped in clusters, creating sacred landscapes where the human body and natural surroundings intersected in complex ritual geometries. Across cultures, there is evidence that phallic worship was intimately tied to the cycles of life and death. Some monuments were constructed at sites associated with ancestral veneration, suggesting that generative energy was linked not only to fertility but to continuity across generations. Burial mounds and phallic markers often coexisted, implying a recognition that creation and mortality are inseparable. The act of worship was thus both an acknowledgement of potential and a confrontation with impermanence. The shadow of the monument, stretching across fields or valleys as the sun moved, became a visual meditation on time itself, a reminder that all life is bound by cycles that must be honored and respected. The tactile nature of these monuments cannot be overlooked. Archaeological evidence shows traces of oil, pigments, and ceremonial deposits applied to stone surfaces, suggesting that touching, caressing, and marking the form were integral to the ritual. These gestures were not sexual in the modern sense but were symbolic acts of attunement. By physically engaging with the monument, ancient devotees enacted a correspondence between their own bodies and the generative energies the phallus represented. The ritual was immersive, multisensory, and profoundly meditative. The scent of incense, the warmth of fire, the smooth or rough texture of stone, the sound of feet moving in measured steps, the collective murmur of voices, all converged to create a hypnotic environment where the sacred and corporeal were inseparable. Interestingly, some of the earliest evidence of phallic veneration predates the formation of complex cities and organized religion. Sites in Anatolia, the Indus Valley, and the Aegean show that these symbols were part of human consciousness from deep prehistory, suggesting an intuitive understanding of life's generative forces. The phallus was, in a sense, a bridge between instinct and reflection, a recognition that creation is both physical and spiritual, that the human body is a participant in cosmic cycles rather than an isolated entity. In this, ancient peoples demonstrated a sophistication often overlooked by modern scholarship. Their symbols were not merely ritualistic, they were meditative tools, frameworks for understanding existence. Consider, for a moment, the psychological impact of scale. A phallus carved to twice or thrice human height dominates the landscape, forcing the observer to acknowledge forces larger than themselves. This intentional exaggeration amplifies the experience of awe and contemplation. The monument is simultaneously threatening and protective, uncanny and familiar, a paradox designed to focus attention and deepen meditation. Standing before it, one might feel the boundaries of self dissolve, sensing a resonance with the wider rhythms of life. In this state, thought slows, perception expands, and consciousness becomes attuned to forces ordinarily unnoticed, the subtle flow of energy in the earth, the movement of air across the skin, the faint vibration of ritual song carried by the wind. Historical records, mythologies, and oral traditions often reinforce these associations. In some cultures, phallic forms were linked to deities who oversaw fertility, agriculture, and even political authority. In others, they were tied to creation myths, embodying the generative principle from which all life emerged. The myths themselves often contain an unsettling undertone, a recognition that creation is inseparable from destruction, that power is fleeting, and that human beings are but participants in a larger, sometimes incomprehensible system. This duality, life and death, awe and fear, is central to the hypnotic, meditative quality of phallic worship. It is a reflection not merely of sexuality but of existential awareness, a quiet, pervasive acknowledgement of human fragility and the vastness of forces beyond comprehension. As night descends upon these ancient landscapes, one can imagine the shadows cast by these monumental forms. Moonlight might strike the stone at an angle that exaggerates its shape, creating shifting forms that seem to move as the observer does. Fires from nearby settlements illuminate carvings and reliefs, bringing them to life in flickering motion. The interplay of light and shadow transforms the phallus from a static object into a living presence, a dynamic entity that participates in the rhythms of human ritual and natural cycles alike. In this shifting, hypnotic space, the line between stone and spirit, between symbol and reality, becomes blurred. The observer is drawn into contemplation, into a trance-like awareness where the ordinary boundaries of perception dissolve, and the monument becomes a conduit to the infinite. As the mind drifts deeper into this ancient world, the enormity of the phallus becomes more than physical, it becomes a bridge between temporal existence and timeless principle. The stone's presence commands stillness, yet there is an energy beneath the surface, a subtle vibration that suggests life coursing through immobile matter. Communities did not merely erect these forms, they interacted with them as though they were conscious participants in the rituals of daily life. Offerings of grain, clay figurines, and sacred oils were more than tokens, they were gestures of connection, attempts to synchronize human will with the inexorable flow of creation. Standing before one of these monuments, one can imagine the soft murmur of prayer, the measured rhythm of footsteps around the sacred site, the almost imperceptible reverence of hands brushing the cool stone. In that silence, a consciousness emerges, not personal but collective, merging observer and observed into a singular awareness. Across Anatolia and the Aegean, evidence points to the earliest monumental phallic forms, carved directly from bedrock, rising in isolation on hills and plateaus. These forms, unlike later decorative or ritualized versions, were raw and imposing, deliberately exaggerated to evoke awe. The ancients seemed to understand that scale could induce a state of meditation, that standing before something beyond ordinary dimensions forced the mind to slow and the senses to expand. The enormous phallus was a mirror of life itself, both potent and fragile, assertive yet ephemeral. Its enormity hinted at the infinite while its materiality reminded devotees of the human scale. The tension between the infinite and the immediate created a space for reflection, a meditative threshold in which worshippers could contemplate the cyclical nature of existence, the impermanence of the body, and the persistence of the generative principle. In Minoan Crete, phallic worship appears intertwined with ritualized festivities and societal ceremonies. Frescoes and reliefs suggest that phallic symbols were not merely decorative but were embedded in communal experience. Participants may have danced in circles, moved in deliberate sequences, and engaged in acts of devotion designed to align their bodies with cosmic cycles. The phallus, in these contexts, was both focus and participant, an entity whose presence structured human movement, attention, and thought. It became impossible to distinguish between the ritual performer and the monument itself, both were conduits for the same generative energy. Here, the hypnotic, meditative element of worship is evident. Through repetition, rhythm, and bodily engagement, individuals entered a liminal state where ordinary consciousness blurred and they became attuned to the forces the phallus represented. The shadow of the phallus, as it stretched across valleys, temple courtyards, and ceremonial grounds, played a subtle yet profound role in ritual experience. Morning and evening light transformed its contours, casting shifting shapes across the landscape. In early light, its shadow might fall long and narrow, a silent finger pointing toward unseen horizons. At noon, it could become compressed and squat, emphasizing the monument's verticality. The ancients, attuned to the subtleties of time and light, may have incorporated these changing shadows into ritual calendars, aligning ceremonial activity with the monument's interaction with the sun. In this way, the phallus was both symbol and instrument, mediating between celestial movement and human action, creating an ever-shifting environment that demanded contemplation, attention, and humility. In some South Asian traditions, phallic worship evolved into the revered linga, often paired with a representation of the feminine principle, the yoni. Together, these forms encapsulated the union of male and female, energy and matter, creation and manifestation. The interaction of these forms in ritual was not merely symbolic, it was experiential. Devotees would pour water, milk, or sacred oils over the linga, tracing its contours and engaging physically with a representation of cosmic energy. In this meditative act, the worshipper became both observer and participant, merging consciousness with the symbol. The ritual's cadence, the repetition of offerings, and the careful alignment of posture and intention created a hypnotic environment, where thought slowed and the mind opened to the vast, ineffable forces the monuments embodied. Yet, as with all meditative practices, there is a subtle tension present. Phallic monuments, particularly those of extraordinary scale, were not universally comforting. They could also evoke fear, unease, or even dread. This shadowed quality was deliberate. Ancient peoples understood that creation and destruction, life and death, were intertwined. The monument reminded observers that generative power carries responsibility, that existence is fleeting, and that the forces governing life are ultimately beyond full human control. The tension between attraction and repulsion, awe and subtle terror, served as a tool for deep reflection, a meditation on the paradoxes inherent in being alive. To confront the monumental phallus was to confront mortality itself, yet within that confrontation lay the promise of insight and alignment with the enduring cycles of life. Anthropological evidence suggests that phallic worship often coincided with rites of passage, marking transitions from one stage of life to another. Adolescents, entering adulthood, may have been brought into proximity with these monuments, participating in rituals designed to attune them to the rhythms of reproduction, growth, and societal responsibility. Couples about to marry may have performed offerings or meditative acts at the stones, invoking fertility and protection. Even communities in decline, facing famine or ecological stress, turned to phallic monuments as a source of hope, a symbolic channel through which generative energy could be requested, visualized, and honored. In this way, the monuments served as anchors for human consciousness across the arc of individual and collective life, bridging personal experience with cosmic principle. Consider the psychological mechanics at play. Humans are inherently attuned to symbolism and scale. The monumental phallus amplifies not only physical presence but also cognitive and emotional resonance. Its exaggerated form forces attention, slowing the mind and creating a contemplative state. The act of worship, whether through touch, ritual, or observation, engages multiple senses, embedding the experience in memory and consciousness. The repetition of ritualized gestures, synchronized with natural cycles, produces a hypnotic rhythm, aligning human perception with the generative forces symbolized by the monument. Modern neuroscience suggests that such repetitive, immersive experiences can induce trance states, heighten suggestibility, and expand awareness, all outcomes that ancient cultures may have exploited intuitively to deepen the spiritual resonance of phallic worship. Even in regions where phallic worship was eventually subsumed into more complex religious systems, traces of these practices persisted, encoded in myth, ritual, and architectural symbolism. Temples often incorporated phallic motifs in hidden niches, sculpted reliefs, or alignment with celestial bodies. Artifacts buried beneath ritual floors, sometimes centuries old, reveal that even when overt worship declined, the underlying recognition of generative power endured. This persistence underscores the universality and longevity of the symbol, the phallus was never merely an anatomical object, it was a framework for understanding, a lens through which humans engaged with the mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos. As night falls once more upon this imagined landscape, the observer feels the subtle hum of existence, the quiet pulse of generative energy that persists across centuries. The monumental phallus, in its silent grandeur, mediates between past and present, human and divine, seen and unseen. It is a threshold of perception, inviting the mind to slow, the breath to deepen, and consciousness to expand. In this quiet, immersive meditation, one begins to sense the continuity of human fascination with creation, the enduring human desire to connect with forces beyond the body, and the hypnotic interplay of awe, reverence, and subtle fear that ancient worshippers must have experienced. Even as we attempt to reconstruct these experiences in imagination, the phallus continues to assert its presence, reminding us that some truths are not apprehended intellectually but felt through embodied attention, sensory engagement, and contemplative stillness. The monumental phallus is a vessel of meditation, a focal point for reflection on life's cycles, an anchor for consciousness that spans millennia. To approach it, even in imagination, is to enter a liminal state, a space between history and dream, a hypnotic realm where the boundaries of self dissolve and the pulse of life can be faintly felt resonating through stone, air, and consciousness alike. And so, the origins of phallic worship are enmeshed in human attempts to comprehend life's generative forces, to honor both birth and mortality, and to engage with energies that transcend ordinary perception. These monuments are not relics frozen in time, they are living echoes, vibrating with the awareness of countless generations who observed, touched, and meditated upon their forms. In their presence, we are called to slow, to observe, to reflect, and to drift, mind and body attuned to the rhythms of creation, the mystery of fertility, and the eternal, hypnotic pull of the sacred shaft. As we drift further into the ancient world, the presence of the phallus reveals itself not as a localized phenomenon but as a motif that spans continents, cultures, and millennia. From the wind-swept valleys of Anatolia to the lush plains of the Indus, from the sun-baked hills of Crete to the riverine heartlands of South Asia, the colossal phallus manifests as both symbol and experience, a universal acknowledgement of the generative forces that govern existence. In contemplating its ubiquity, one begins to sense the profound resonance of this symbol across time and geography. It is at once intimate and cosmic, private and communal, tangible and ineffable. It invites the observer into a meditation that traverses both history and imagination. In Anatolia, for instance, the early Neolithic cultures carved elongated phallic stones from bedrock, often isolated on hillsides where the horizon stretched wide and the sky seemed endless. The placement of these monuments was deliberate, their orientation aligned with rivers, valleys, or other natural features, creating a dialogue between human-made form and landscape. The enormity of the stone, often dwarfing any single observer, produced a physical sensation of awe, of being small yet part of a vast, interconnected system. Anthropologists suggest that these sites were not simply ceremonial, they were centers of experiential engagement, where movement, observation, and ritual combined to create a hypnotic encounter with the generative forces of the universe. The phallus, in this sense, was not merely symbolic but active, shaping perception, thought, and consciousness. Travel eastward, and the phallic principle assumes different forms, reflecting regional beliefs while maintaining a consistent reverence for creation and fertility. In the Indus Valley, for example, the linga emerges as a central icon of worship. Often paired with the yoni, it embodies a union of energies, male and female, static and dynamic, visible and invisible. Rituals surrounding the linga were immersive. Devotees poured water, milk, or oils over the carved stone, traced its curves with ritual gestures, and engaged in chants and offerings designed to synchronize their bodies with cosmic rhythms. Here, the phallus transcends representation. It becomes a medium through which consciousness aligns with forces beyond the immediate senses. The act of devotion is meditative, hypnotic, and subtly unsettling, invoking awe while reminding the observer of the delicate balance between power and mortality, creation and decay. Across the Aegean, in Minoan Crete, phallic symbols appear in frescoes, reliefs, and carved stone artifacts. They are integrated into daily life and ritual practice, suggesting that the sacred shaft was not an abstract concept but a lived experience. Processions, dances, and music accompanied engagement with these symbols, creating multisensory environments that heightened meditation and reflection. Movement mirrored cosmic patterns, song echoed the rhythms of sun and moon, offerings invoked continuity with ancestors and deities alike. The Minoan phallus, while occasionally decorative, served as a conduit for understanding the cycles of life and death, linking individual consciousness to collective experience. The hypnotic quality of ritual, the repetitive gestures, and the immersive environment induced a state of reflection and trance, fostering alignment with the generative forces the monument symbolized. In regions of Africa, particularly along the Nile and in Nubian territories, phallic symbolism is intertwined with both fertility and sovereignty. Pharaohs and local rulers incorporated phallic imagery into religious and state iconography, connecting political authority with generative potency. Obelisks, standing like elongated phalli, served both as monuments of power and as conduits for spiritual energy. The play of light across their surfaces at dawn and dusk, the alignment with celestial bodies, and the public rituals surrounding them created immersive experiences of reverence, blending awe, fear, and contemplation. The hypnotic interplay of light, shadow, and monument fostered a meditative state among participants, connecting the earthly and divine, the political and spiritual, the individual and the collective. The Americas, too, provide evidence of phallic symbolism embedded within ritual landscapes. In certain pre-Columbian societies, fertility figures, carved stones, and ritual effigies hint at the universality of the phallic principle. These forms, while culturally distinct, echo the same meditative and contemplative functions. They demand attention, evoke awe, and create a space where human consciousness can interface with unseen generative forces. The monumental nature of these forms, their integration with natural landscapes, and their role in communal rituals suggest that human engagement with the sacred shaft is not merely sexual or aesthetic but profoundly existential, a meditative recognition of the cycles that govern life and death. The hypnotic quality of these monuments often derives from scale, repetition, and orientation. Across continents, human societies understood that enlargement of the familiar into the extraordinary could induce awe and reflection. By exaggerating the form of the phallus, ancient peoples forced observers to slow their thoughts, expand their perception, and enter a contemplative state. Ritual gestures, synchronized with natural cycles, amplified this effect, producing an immersive experience where meditation, reverence, and subtle fear coalesced. Touch, movement, sound, and smell, all were carefully orchestrated to align human consciousness with cosmic principles. The monumental phallus, in this way, was a tool for meditation, a lens for understanding life's generative forces, and a threshold between the seen and unseen. In addition to its spiritual significance, phallic symbolism often carried social and political meaning. The erection of monumental phalluses was a demonstration of communal cohesion, technical skill, and cultural continuity. Constructing a large stone or wooden phallus required cooperation, planning, and shared vision, reflecting the integration of societal structures with religious devotion. Communities were drawn together, their attention focused, their collective energy aligned. The act of construction, engagement, and worship reinforced social bonds while facilitating meditation on universal principles. The hypnotic environment created by ritual, movement, and monument was thus both personal and communal, embedding spiritual experience within the fabric of social life. Interestingly, phallic worship often incorporated dualities, male and female, light and shadow, creation and destruction. This duality created subtle tension, a quiet unease that deepened meditation. The observer confronted both the potential of life and the inevitability of mortality, understanding that generative power carries both blessing and responsibility. The monumental phallus, in its silent, immovable presence, served as a mirror for human consciousness, reflecting desires, fears, and the inexorable cycles of existence. Its scale and isolation amplified this effect, fostering introspection, reflection, and a trance-like awareness of forces beyond ordinary perception. Through this meditation on phallic forms across continents, it becomes clear that the symbol is more than anatomical, it is existential. It embodies human engagement with creation, mortality, and cosmic rhythm. Across cultures, the phallus serves as a vessel of meditation, a focal point for reflection, and a conduit for alignment with forces larger than the individual. The hypnotic, immersive quality of ritual, the tactile engagement with monuments, and the subtle interplay of fear, awe, and reverence combine to create experiences that bridge history, imagination, and consciousness. The phallus, in its colossal and enigmatic presence, is a threshold of perception. To approach it is to enter a space where thought slows, awareness expands, and the ordinary boundaries of self dissolve. Across Anatolia, the Indus Valley, Crete, Africa, and the Americas, this principle endures, suggesting that human beings, in their encounter with life's generative forces, have always sought forms that command attention, foster meditation, and align the personal with the cosmic. It is a testament to the universality of human contemplation, the hypnotic power of scale, and the enduring fascination with the mysteries of creation. As the sun dips beneath imagined horizons, the monumental phallus takes on a spectral presence, its shadow stretching long and thin across the undulating earth. In the quiet of dusk, the observer becomes acutely aware of scale, of the contrast between human frailty and the enduring permanence of carved stone. Across continents, this same principle persists. The phallus, whether sculpted in Anatolia, molded in clay in the Indus Valley, or carved into Crete's sacred spaces, functions as a bridge between the tangible and the ineffable. Its enormity enforces stillness, compelling meditation, inviting a trance-like awareness in which the ordinary mind begins to dissolve into reflection on life, death, and the cycles that govern existence. In East Asia, early forms of phallic reverence emerge in rural and mountainous landscapes, where natural rock formations resembling the organ were incorporated into ritual practice. Pilgrims would traverse long, winding paths, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot accentuated by the rhythmic cadence of chanting or silent prayer. Here, the monument is not an object to be possessed but a space to inhabit. By walking alongside it, circling it, or touching its surface, worshippers enter a dialogue with energy itself, feeling the subtle resonance of generative force moving through earth, stone, and human body alike. The act of approach, deliberate and mindful, becomes an immersive meditation, a slow, sensory journey into connection with forces that are both intimate and vast. In South America, pre-Columbian societies erected fertility markers and phallic effigies in ritual centers, aligning them with sacred mountains, rivers, and astronomical events. The monument's size and placement demanded attention and contemplation, much like their counterparts in Eurasia. Observers would trace ritual paths in deliberate procession, carrying offerings and chanting in harmonized unison. These movements, repetitive and deliberate, induced a hypnotic state, merging the physical body with the spiritual dimension suggested by the monument. The phallus, in its immense and exaggerated form, became a lens through which observers could perceive the continuity of life, the impermanence of individual existence, and the persistent rhythms of the cosmos. Across all these regions, phallic worship is intertwined with cycles of fertility, harvest, and reproduction. The monument itself becomes a calendar, a focal point that aligns human action with the pulse of nature. Shadows, wind, light, and even seasonal changes animate the stone, creating an immersive environment that encourages contemplation. The monumental phallus is not static, it interacts with the observer, the environment, and the ritual, producing a subtle feedback loop that reinforces meditation. Standing before it, one is drawn into rhythm with earth, sky, and body, the mind slipping into a trance-like state where the sacred and the corporeal merge. Anthropologists note that in many societies, phallic worship was inseparable from sexual ritual, yet not in the way modern observers might assume. Sexuality was understood as a microcosm of generative force, a reflection of the same principles the monument embodied. Engagement with the phallus was not necessarily erotic in contemporary terms, it was contemplative, symbolic, and meditative. Touching, tracing, offering, or circling the monument allowed participants to attune themselves to the universal cycles of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. In this sense, the phallus was a tool of consciousness, a tactile guide to understanding life's rhythms, and a threshold between self and cosmos. The interplay of awe and subtle fear, present in every culture's monumental phallus, underscores the duality inherent in these rituals. The monuments represent creation, yet they remind worshippers of mortality. Their sheer scale suggests infinite power, yet their materiality speaks to impermanence. The observer experiences both attraction and hesitation, comfort and unease, reverence and subtle trepidation. This tension is hypnotic. It slows thought, deepens perception, and creates a liminal state in which insight can emerge. Across continents and centuries, the monumental phallus functions as a mediator of consciousness, an object designed to engage the mind, body, and spirit in continuous reflection on the cycles of existence. In certain regions, phallic forms were deliberately paired with symbols of the feminine principle, creating landscapes of duality. The linga and yoni of South Asia, or paired fertility markers in the Americas, emphasize the inseparability of male and female, creation and manifestation. Rituals often involve offerings, movement, and meditation, each act reinforcing the alignment of human consciousness with cosmic patterns. The observer, moving through these sacred landscapes, becomes part of the living symbol, participating in cycles far larger than individual existence. The hypnotic repetition of gestures, the careful timing of ritual with natural phenomena, and the immersion in multisensory experience combine to produce profound meditative states, blurring the line between worshipper and monument, self and universe. Across Anatolia, Crete, the Indus Valley, Africa, and the Americas, monumental phallic forms are strategically located within landscapes, emphasizing the relationship between humans and the natural world. Elevated sites command visibility, valleys guide processional movement, rivers, hills, and mountains interact with shadows and light, creating dynamic meditation spaces. Human experience is inseparable from environment. The phallus is both anchor and conduit, linking body, consciousness, and cosmos. The monumental form enforces stillness, yet the surrounding landscape encourages exploration and reflection, producing a hypnotic oscillation between awe, contemplation, and subtle unease. The scale of the phallus also reinforces social cohesion. Construction required coordination, planning, and shared intention, reflecting the integration of society, ritual, and spirituality. The process of building, maintaining, and interacting with the monument reinforced communal identity and collective memory. Participants became intimately attuned to the cycles of nature, the generative forces symbolized by the phallus, and the rhythms of society itself. In this sense, the monument was both spiritual and social, a locus where meditation, awe, and human cooperation converged, producing experiences that were simultaneously personal, communal, and cosmic. The hypnotic environment surrounding the phallus was reinforced by sensory engagement. Scented oils, smoke from fires, the sound of footsteps and chanting, and the cool or rough texture of stone combined to create immersive experiences. These rituals facilitated deep contemplation, focusing the observer's awareness on the monument, the body, and the surrounding natural cycles. The meditative quality of these engagements mirrors modern understanding of mindfulness. Repetition, sensory focus, and deliberate attention produce altered states of consciousness, creating receptivity to insight, reflection, and awe. The phallus, in monumental form, functioned as both object and facilitator of this experience. As night falls across imagined landscapes, the phallus assumes a spectral presence. Shadows elongate, the moonlight caresses its contours, and the observer is drawn into meditative stillness. Across continents, this symbol has persisted for millennia, embedding itself into human consciousness, mythology, and ritual. Its presence reminds us that generative energy is universal, that human fascination with creation, fertility, and the cycles of life transcends geography and epoch. The monumental phallus is simultaneously anchor, threshold, and conduit, a meditation tool that bridges history, imagination, and consciousness, offering access to profound, hypnotic insight into the nature of existence. Even in societies that no longer actively erect monumental phalluses, the symbolic and psychological residue endures. Art, architecture, ritual, and cultural memory all carry traces of these practices. They remind us that the sacred shaft is not merely an anatomical reference but a universal tool for meditation, contemplation, and alignment with the cycles of life. Its hypnotic, immersive power persists in human consciousness, demonstrating the timeless nature of engagement with generative forces, and the enduring desire to connect with the mysteries of creation, mortality, and the cosmos. The monumental phallus, across continents and centuries, emerges as a lens through which humans experience existence itself. Its scale, placement, ritual context, and symbolic resonance create immersive environments that evoke awe, reflection, and subtle unease. By observing, touching, and ritualizing the form, humans engage with forces far larger than themselves, entering meditative states that blur boundaries between self, society, and cosmos. Across time and geography, the phallus functions not only as a symbol of fertility but as a threshold to altered consciousness, a conduit for meditation, and a mirror reflecting the cycles of life, death, and creation. The monumental phallus, across the vast tapestry of human history, was never merely a static symbol. It existed as a locus of ritual, a center of collective experience where individuals could confront the forces of life and death, desire and transcendence, awe and subtle fear. To approach the sacred shaft was to step into a world where boundaries between body and spirit, the temporal and the eternal, began to dissolve. In the flickering light of ceremonial fires, under the canopy of night or the sharp glare of midday sun, the phallus became a mediator between human consciousness and the invisible currents that shape existence. Its presence demanded attention, measured movement, and deliberate thought, producing a hypnotic environment that guided perception, slowed cognition, and invited deep meditation. In many early societies, ritual engagement with the phallus was immersive, drawing upon all senses. The touch of carved stone or polished wood, the scent of incense or fragrant oils, the sound of feet moving rhythmically over earth or stone, the harmonized intonation of chants, all contributed to an environment in which ordinary consciousness became fluid, open to subtle currents of awareness. Movements were often carefully choreographed, circling the monument, bowing, offering, or tracing its contours, gestures repeated over hours, days, or seasons. These repetitive, meditative actions created a hypnotic resonance, a syncopation between human body and sacred form, reinforcing alignment with generative forces. Consider the rituals of the ancient Near East. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, phallic monuments often occupied central positions within sacred precincts. Processions moved deliberately through the space, echoing the alignment of celestial bodies, seasonal cycles, and agricultural rhythms. The monument was not a passive witness but an active participant, its scale and placement shaping the movement, perception, and focus of devotees. Observers would feel their attention drawn naturally toward its apex, the enormity of form inducing a subtle reverence, even trepidation, as the body and mind attuned to rhythms beyond ordinary perception. The monument was a fulcrum of consciousness, an axis around which ritual and meditation pivoted. In Crete, Minoan societies integrated phallic symbols into frescoes, reliefs, and ceremonial objects, creating immersive environments in which the sacred shaft was encountered in multiple sensory dimensions. Movement through ritual spaces mirrored cosmic patterns. Dancers, priests, and participants moved in circles and spirals, echoing celestial trajectories. The phallus, often depicted in painted or sculpted form, became a focal point for both collective and individual meditation. Its presence guided attention, slowed perception, and evoked a subtle sense of awe mingled with unease, a hypnotic duality that deepened the contemplative experience. Through ritual, movement, and sensory engagement, devotees were drawn into a state of ecstasy, a heightened awareness of their connection to generative forces, and a meditation on the impermanence and continuity of life. The union of male and female principles, exemplified in the linga and yoni of South Asia, demonstrates the depth and sophistication of ritual engagement with the sacred shaft. Here, rituals involved offering liquids, reciting chants, and tracing gestures along the contours of sacred forms. Participants were invited to attune themselves not only to physical forms but to invisible currents of energy, aligning personal consciousness with cosmic rhythm. The repetition, immersion, and sensory focus induced meditative states, where the distinction between self and monument, observer and observed, blurred. In these moments, worship became simultaneously intimate and expansive, contemplative and ecstatic. The phallus was a bridge, a channel, and a mirror of the forces that govern creation. The hypnotic aspect of phallic ritual is closely tied to scale and exaggeration. Monumental forms, towering over participants, produced awe and subtle fear. The exaggerated dimensions amplified attention and slowed cognition, fostering a meditative receptivity to the sacred. To circle such a monument, touch its surface, or observe its contours was to enter a threshold of consciousness in which ordinary thought receded. One felt the tension between attraction and apprehension, potency and fragility, creation and mortality. This liminal state, pervasive across cultures, underscores the universality of human engagement with the sacred shaft. The monument's enormity and ritual context facilitated reflection on forces far larger than the self. Across the Americas, pre-Columbian societies integrated phallic symbolism into fertility rituals and ceremonial centers. Large stone markers and carved effigies aligned with mountains, rivers, or solar and lunar cycles, producing immersive environments in which participants could experience the intersection of landscape, ritual, and consciousness. Movement, chanting, and offerings became meditative tools, guiding attention and perception. The monumental phallus, through its scale, placement, and symbolic resonance, functioned as a conduit to altered states of awareness, producing both awe and subtle unease. Participants were drawn into alignment with generative forces, experiencing meditation and ecstasy intertwined. Even in African traditions, phallic monuments were central to communal ritual. Obelisks, carved stones, and fertility markers linked social cohesion with spiritual engagement. Construction and maintenance of monumental forms required cooperation and shared intention, reinforcing social bonds and collective memory. Participants engaged physically and mentally, circling monuments, offering sacrifices, and chanting in synchrony. These immersive, repetitive actions induced trance-like states, deepening meditative reflection and attuning participants to both generative forces and communal identity. The monumental phallus, in this context, is simultaneously personal, communal, and cosmic, a focal point of meditation and alignment with life's cycles. The rituals surrounding phallic monuments often involved dualities, paradoxes, and subtle tension. Life and death, creation and destruction, awe and unease coexisted in the meditative experience. Participants confronted mortality even as they invoked fertility. They experienced both attraction and subtle fear, the human body engaging directly with forces larger than itself. This interplay created a hypnotic environment, slowing thought, heightening perception, and fostering introspection. The monumental phallus, by its presence and ritualized engagement, functions as a mirror of human consciousness, reflecting desires, fears, and the cycles that govern existence. In societies where explicit sexual acts were incorporated into ritual, the phallus became an experiential conduit. Sexuality, understood as a reflection of generative principle, was enacted not merely for pleasure but as meditation, as communion with cosmic rhythm. Gestures, touch, and movement mirrored the monument itself, aligning human energy with forces of creation. Participants entered trance-like states, the repetition of action, sensory immersion, and symbolic engagement producing subtle ecstasy, reflection, and insight. The phallus, in this context, is simultaneously symbol, teacher, and channel of awareness, guiding the participant into meditation, reflection, and transcendence. The hypnotic, meditative power of the monumental phallus extends beyond ritual into the surrounding landscape. Natural elements, light, shadow, wind, vegetation, and water, interact with the form, producing dynamic environments. Seasonal changes, sunrise, and sunset alter perception, creating immersive experiences that are constantly shifting yet profoundly familiar. The monument becomes a living participant in ritual meditation, its presence shaping consciousness, aligning awareness with natural cycles, and reinforcing the subtle interplay of awe, fear, and contemplation. Across continents, the monumental phallus serves as both anchor and threshold, a liminal space where ordinary perception dissolves and consciousness aligns with universal cycles. The scale, ritual context, and symbolic resonance induce meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy. Participants engage physically, mentally, and spiritually, attuning themselves to generative forces, communal identity, and cosmic rhythm. In these immersive experiences, the phallus transcends mere anatomical representation, functioning as a bridge between the human and the infinite, the temporal and eternal, the observed and the observer. As the night deepens over imagined landscapes, the monumental phallus becomes more than an object, it is an axis of perception, a threshold through which consciousness can drift toward the eternal. Across civilizations, its ritual significance is inseparable from the sensory and symbolic experience it mediates. The human body, in proximity to the monument, engages not only with stone or wood but with the unseen currents of generative force. Every gesture, every breath, every ripple of sound becomes part of an immersive meditation, a subtle alignment with the rhythms of the cosmos. The phallus, in this moment, is not merely observed, it resonates with life itself, echoing cycles of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. In South Asia, rituals surrounding the linga, often paired with the yoni, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between symbol, body, and consciousness. Offerings of milk, water, and fragrant oils are poured over the stone form, their physical flow mirrored in the inner experience of the worshipper. Repetition and rhythm create a hypnotic cadence, guiding awareness inward while connecting it outward to the forces the monument embodies. Touching, tracing, or circling the form produces a subtle resonance within the body, a vibration that mirrors the generative principle itself. Meditation and ritual merge, the observer becomes participant, the sacred form becomes teacher, and the boundaries between human and cosmic rhythm begin to blur. Across Crete, Minoan ritual art suggests a similar immersive philosophy. Frescoes and carvings depict ceremonial processions, dances, and offerings centered on phallic symbols. The repetition of movement, coordinated with song or instrumental rhythm, created environments in which consciousness could expand and perception could slow. The monumental phallus, whether carved in stone, molded in clay, or painted in fresco, anchors the ritual, focusing attention and shaping experience. Participants, moving in circular or spiral paths, mirrored cosmic patterns, aligning themselves with both natural and spiritual rhythms. The hypnotic interplay of motion, sound, and sight produces a trance-like awareness, a meditation on the cycles of life, death, and fertility that the phallus embodies. In the Americas, pre-Columbian societies developed similar immersive rituals around phallic effigies and fertility markers. The monuments were strategically placed, often aligned with rivers, mountains, or astronomical events. Observers moved deliberately through ceremonial landscapes, carrying offerings, chanting, or performing dance. The act of approaching, circling, and engaging with the monument created a meditation in motion, a syncopation of body, mind, and environment. These rituals were profoundly hypnotic, designed to slow cognition, heighten perception, and attune participants to the cycles of life. The phallus served not merely as symbol but as a conduit, guiding consciousness through a meditative, trance-like encounter with the generative forces of the universe. Even in Africa, monumental phallic forms shaped ritual experience. Obelisks, carved stones, and fertility markers functioned as centers of ceremonial activity, where movement, touch, and chant-produced meditative resonance. The construction of such forms required collective effort, aligning communal intention with ritual practice. Observers and participants experienced both awe and subtle fear, attuning themselves to the magnitude of generative forces. The scale, placement, and sensory environment of the monument facilitated immersion in cycles of fertility, life, and death, producing meditative states that blurred the boundary between human and divine, between self and cosmos. The hypnotic quality of these rituals is amplified by sensory immersion. The tactile experience of touching stone, wood, or clay, combined with the smell of incense, the sound of movement or chant, and the visual interplay of light and shadow, creates an environment that engages body and mind simultaneously. Repetition of gestures, rhythm of movement, and alignment with natural phenomena induce trance-like states, slowing thought, deepening perception, and opening the observer to subtle currents of awareness. Across continents and millennia, these immersive environments demonstrate the universality of human engagement with the monumental phallus, revealing its function as a tool for meditation, reflection, and communion with generative forces. Duality and paradox are inherent in phallic ritual. Life and death, creation and destruction, attraction and subtle fear coexist within the meditative experience. Observers confront mortality even as they invoke fertility, experiencing both reverence and unease. This tension deepens meditation, heightens perception, and fosters introspection. The monumental phallus mirrors human consciousness, reflecting desires, fears, and the cycles that govern existence. It is both anchor and threshold, a liminal space where ordinary awareness dissolves and consciousness aligns with universal rhythms. In some societies, ritual ecstasy was deliberately cultivated through sensory overload and repetition. Extended ceremonies, chanting, music, dancing, and tactile engagement with the phallus produced altered states of consciousness. Participants experienced sensations that transcended ordinary perception, merging physical, emotional, and spiritual awareness into a meditative whole. Sexuality, when integrated into these rituals, was not merely erotic but symbolic, an enactment of generative principles, aligning the human body with cosmic rhythm. Through this immersive practice, the phallus became a vessel for meditation, a conduit for energy, and a mirror for consciousness. The placement of monumental phallic forms within landscapes reinforces their hypnotic power. Elevated hills, riverbanks, sacred groves, and open plains all interact with the monument, shaping perception and guiding attention. Seasonal changes, sunlight, and shadow animate the form, producing a dynamic, ever-changing environment. The observer experiences both stability and flux, permanence and transience, creating meditation spaces that are alive, responsive, and immersive. The phallus, through its presence and interaction with environment, bridges the temporal and eternal, the corporeal and cosmic, the observed and observer. Across cultures, rituals surrounding the phallus reinforce both personal and communal meditation. Individual engagement, through touch, movement, and contemplation, aligns consciousness with universal cycles. Collective rituals, processions, and ceremonies synchronize communities with generative forces, embedding spiritual experience within social cohesion. The monumental phallus, in this context, serves as both personal tool and communal anchor, guiding meditation, fostering reflection, and cultivating awe. Its hypnotic power lies in its ability to merge sensory experience, symbolic meaning, and cosmic alignment into a unified, immersive practice. As night deepens, the observer senses the subtle vibration of the sacred shaft, the pulse of generative force that resonates across centuries and continents. The monumental phallus becomes a living presence, mediating consciousness, inviting reflection, and guiding meditation. Its scale, placement, ritual context, and sensory environment create a hypnotic threshold where perception slows, awareness expands, and ordinary thought dissolves. Across Anatolia, Crete, the Indus Valley, Africa, and the Americas, this principle persists. The phallus is not merely a symbol, it is an axis of consciousness, a conduit of energy, and a mirror of existence itself. Even when explicit rituals fade or monuments crumble, the resonance of the sacred shaft endures. Art, architecture, folklore, and cultural memory preserve its hypnotic and meditative power. Across time, it continues to guide human consciousness, attune perception to generative forces, and evoke awe, contemplation, and subtle unease. The monumental phallus is simultaneously historical and timeless, tangible and invisible, anatomical and cosmic. Its immersive, meditative, and hypnotic qualities reveal the universality of human engagement with creation, mortality, and the eternal rhythms that govern life. The sacred shaft, through ritual, meditation, and immersive experience, endures as a testament to humanity's quest for understanding. Across continents, cultures, and millennia, it remains a threshold of perception, a vessel for contemplation, and a mirror reflecting the cycles of life, death, and creation. To approach it, to engage with it, is to enter a liminal state, to align consciousness with cosmic rhythm, and to experience meditation, awe, and subtle ecstasy intertwined. The monumental phallus is not merely a relic of the past, it is a living echo, vibrating through time and human awareness, hypnotic, meditative guide into the mysteries of existence. The monumental phallus, as we have journeyed through millennia and across continents, is far more than a symbol of fertility or reproduction. It exists at the intersection of mystery and ritual, of power and awe, of visible form and invisible force. In approaching these monuments, one senses the weight of accumulated human consciousness, the generations who erected them, touched them, danced around them, and meditated in their presence. There is an almost imperceptible vibration in the air, a resonance that lingers even in imagination, hinting at the sacred and the uncanny. The phallus, monumental and imposing, becomes a vessel for energies both generative and transformative, a portal into realms beyond ordinary perception. In the ancient Near East, phallic forms were often imbued with magic, understood as active participants in human destiny. Shamans and priests, their movements deliberate and hypnotic, invoked the monument not merely as symbol but as agent, a conduit through which cosmic forces could be accessed and manipulated. The rituals were immersive, engaging all senses. Firelight danced across the surface of carved stone, incense smoke swirled in rhythmic eddies, chant echoed softly and then louder, guiding participants into altered states of awareness. Every gesture, offering, and circumambulation reinforced the alignment between human intent and generative energy. The phallus was simultaneously teacher and altar, a physical threshold to understanding, experience, and transformation. Across Crete and the Aegean, Minoan ritual practice integrated phallic imagery into art, dance, and communal ceremony. Frescoes depict processions in circular and spiral movement, echoing the rhythms of nature, celestial cycles, and human physiology. The monumental phallus, sometimes carved into stone or painted in vivid fresco, anchors these ceremonies, commanding attention, slowing thought, and guiding consciousness. Participants, moving through choreographed gestures and sensory engagement, entered a trance-like state where body, mind, and spirit aligned with cosmic rhythm. The phallus was at once object and catalyst, a living presence through which generative and mystical energies could be perceived. In South Asia, the linga and yoni embody duality and balance, representing the union of male and female, creation and manifestation. Ritual acts, pouring water or milk, tracing gestures along the form, reciting mantras, created an immersive, meditative experience. The monumental phallus, even when physically small, assumes cosmic scale through ritual, becoming a channel for consciousness, a mirror of generative and mystical forces. Participants, through repetition and sensory engagement, achieve a trance-like focus that blurs boundaries, self and cosmos, observer and observed, matter and energy. The hypnotic pull of these rituals lies in their rhythm, scale, and symbolism, guiding perception toward contemplation, ecstasy, and subtle unease. In Africa, monumental phallic forms, such as obelisks and fertility markers, often carried both spiritual and social significance. Communities would coordinate rituals around these forms, aligning ceremonial movement with natural and cosmic cycles. Chant, dance, touch, and offering reinforced the meditative resonance of the monument, guiding participants into states where ordinary perception slowed and consciousness expanded. The phallus, through its scale and presence, produced subtle fear, reverence, and awe, a triad that cultivated immersive meditation and reflection on human mortality, fertility, and the enduring cycles of existence. Across the Americas, pre-Columbian societies created phallic effigies and markers integrated with landscapes, mountains, rivers, and celestial alignments. These forms became focal points for ritual, processions, and meditation. The act of approaching, touching, or moving around the monument synchronized human consciousness with cosmic rhythm, guiding participants into meditative, trance-like states. Here again, the phallus is not mere representation but active agent, a bridge between human intention, sensory engagement, and generative force. Its hypnotic power arises from scale, placement, ritual context, and the interplay of awe, subtle fear, and reflection. The phallus also functions as a vessel for mystery. Its enormous, exaggerated form is designed to evoke contemplation, to slow cognition, and to induce awe. Across cultures, monumental phallic symbols embody paradox. They suggest both potency and fragility, creation and impermanence, intimacy and cosmic significance. This paradoxical presence is unsettling yet meditative, inviting reflection on forces beyond ordinary perception. Participants in ritual confront their mortality, desires, and the cycles of life and death, their consciousness guided by the silent authority of the monument. In this sense, the phallus is a teacher, a threshold, and a mirror of the human condition. Ritual ecstasy surrounding the phallus is often amplified through sensory immersion. Fires, smoke, chant, music, the texture of stone or wood, and the flow of offerings create environments that engage body and mind simultaneously. Repetition of movement, gesture, and sound induces trance-like states, slowing ordinary thought and heightening awareness of subtle currents of generative force. Across continents, from Anatolia to the Americas, this hypnotic immersion reflects an understanding that human engagement with monumental forms is experiential, embodied, and profoundly transformative. Sexuality, when incorporated into ritual, is not mere indulgence but a symbolic enactment of cosmic rhythm. Touch, movement, and meditation mirror the monument itself, aligning human energy with generative forces. Participants enter liminal states where consciousness expands and perception is refined. The phallus, monumental and exaggerated, serves as both symbol and channel, mediating between self and cosmos, body and spirit, temporal and eternal. Through ritual, meditation, and immersion, the sacred shaft becomes a living conduit, a focus for reflection, ecstasy, and subtle, unsettling awe. The interplay between monument and landscape enhances hypnotic meditation. Elevated sites, valleys, rivers, and natural features interact with the phallus, creating dynamic environments. Sunlight, shadow, and seasonal change animate the form, reinforcing awareness of impermanence and cyclical forces. The observer experiences both stability and flux, permanence and transience, grounding and transcendence. Across cultures, this alignment between monument and environment ensures that engagement with the phallus is immersive, multisensory, and meditative, guiding consciousness toward awareness of forces larger than the individual. Social and communal dimensions reinforce the hypnotic power of the phallus. Collective ritual, processions, and ceremonial construction fostered cohesion, shared intention, and communal memory. Participation in immersive ritual aligned individuals with generative forces while embedding experience within social and cosmic frameworks. Monumental phallic forms thus functioned as anchors for both personal and communal meditation, producing awe, reflection, and subtle unease. The observer is drawn into cycles of awareness that span body, mind, society, and cosmos. Even when monumental phallic forms fall into disuse, their symbolic and psychological resonance endures. Art, architecture, folklore, and cultural memory preserve hypnotic power, guiding consciousness, evoking awe, and aligning perception with generative cycles. Across time and geography, the sacred shaft remains a threshold of meditation, a vessel for insight, and a mirror reflecting life, death, creation, and cosmic rhythm. It persists as a universal motif, linking the human experience to forces beyond perception, inviting contemplation, and drawing the observer into a liminal, hypnotic space. In approaching the monumental phallus, one senses the weight of history and the subtle vibration of generative force. It is a presence that transcends culture, continent, and epoch, a teacher of cycles, a mirror of consciousness, and a threshold to meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy. Across millennia, this symbol has guided humanity into liminal states where awe, fear, and contemplation converge. The sacred shaft endures as a testament to human fascination with life, death, and creation, a meditative anchor that continues to resonate through consciousness and imagination alike. As night deepens and shadows lengthen across imagined landscapes, the monumental phallus emerges as an anchor of both meditation and mystery. Its sheer scale commands attention, yet its presence is subtle, hypnotic, imbued with a resonance that seems to vibrate beneath the surface of perception. Across continents and centuries, human societies have encountered this presence not merely as representation but as active, almost sentient force. It is a locus where ritual, imagination, and cosmic rhythm converge, a place where ordinary awareness dissolves, allowing consciousness to drift into realms that are at once serene, unsettling, and deeply meditative. In the sacred spaces of the ancient Near East, ritual practice emphasized immersion in the power of the phallus. Priests and devotees moved slowly, deliberately, in circles or spirals around monumental forms, chanting, offering, and touching the sacred stone. Fires cast flickering shadows that danced across its surface, creating the illusion of movement and life, while incense filled the air with swirling patterns of scent that carried symbolic meaning. Each repetition of gesture and chant reinforced alignment with the generative forces the phallus embodied. Participants reported sensations of resonance, subtle vibrations in their bodies, a heightened awareness of breath, heartbeat, and presence. In this meditative space, the phallus became a teacher, a conduit, and a mirror, revealing the cyclical nature of existence and the connection between body, spirit, and cosmos. Across the Aegean, Minoan culture integrated phallic symbolism into architecture, fresco, and communal ritual. Processions and dances traced the curves of sacred monuments, echoing natural and celestial patterns. Music, rhythm, and synchronized movement deepened immersion, slowing perception and inviting trance-like states. The monumental phallus, whether painted or sculpted, became a focal point of meditation, a threshold to altered awareness, and a bridge between the human and the divine. Through this deliberate, immersive practice, participants experienced subtle ecstasy, awe, and reverence, a hypnotic combination that guided reflection on fertility, mortality, and cosmic cycles. In South Asia, ritual around the linga and yoni exemplifies the depth and precision of immersive practice. Pouring water, milk, or oils over the monument, tracing its surface, and reciting chants created a sensory environment that engaged body and mind simultaneously. Repetition of gestures and ritualized breathing fostered trance-like states, enabling participants to perceive subtle energies, align with generative forces, and contemplate the cycles of creation and destruction. Here, the monumental phallus functions as both object and agent, guiding consciousness into reflection, meditation, and ecstasy. The ritual experience transforms perception, encouraging awareness of the self as part of a greater, interconnected whole. In Africa, monumental phallic forms served as focal points for both ritual and social cohesion. Obelisks and fertility markers were sites of ceremonial procession, chant, and offering, producing immersive experiences that engaged community and individual alike. Construction of these monuments required collective effort, embedding ritual significance into social practice. Movement around the monument, repetition of gestures, and sensory engagement induced hypnotic states, enhancing reflection on fertility, life cycles, and mortality. The phallus, monumental in scale and resonant in symbolic meaning, becomes a threshold to altered consciousness, a tool for meditation, and a guide through the liminal space between the mortal and the eternal. Across the Americas, pre-Columbian societies integrated phallic effigies with landscapes, celestial alignments, and ritual practice. Monumental forms were placed in valleys, on riverbanks, or atop elevated terrain, commanding visibility and attention. Processions, offerings, and chants created immersive experiences that aligned human consciousness with cosmic rhythms. Participants moved deliberately, synchronizing gesture, breath, and intention, entering trance-like states where perception slowed and awareness expanded. The phallus, exaggerated and monumental, served as both anchor and conduit, guiding meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy. Its hypnotic power lay in the integration of scale, ritual, landscape, and sensory immersion. The hypnotic effect of the monumental phallus derives from paradox. It embodies both potency and vulnerability, permanence and transience, intimacy and cosmic significance. Participants are drawn into reflection on mortality even as they invoke life-giving energy. Awe and subtle fear coexist, producing a state of heightened perception and meditative focus. The observer confronts the duality of existence, creation intertwined with destruction, fertility entwined with decay. Through this paradox, the phallus becomes a teacher, a mirror, and a threshold, guiding consciousness toward deeper understanding of human experience and cosmic cycles. Sensory engagement enhances immersion and meditation. The texture of stone or wood, the flicker of firelight, the scent of oils or incense, the cadence of chant, and the rhythm of movement synchronize perception with ritual space. Repetition of gestures, circling, or tracing the monument slows ordinary thought and induces trance-like states. Across cultures, this combination of sensory, symbolic, and ritual elements produces subtle ecstasy, reverence, and introspective reflection. The phallus is no longer merely observed, it is experienced, internalized, and integrated into consciousness. Even in societies where sexual ritual was explicit, the phallus functioned as conduit and mirror rather than mere erotic object. Touch, movement, and engagement align the human body with generative force, producing states of consciousness that merged meditation, ecstasy, and subtle awe. The monumental form magnifies the experience, reinforcing awareness of scale, power, and cosmic alignment. In these practices, sexuality and spirituality coexist, meditation and ecstasy merge, and the phallus operates as a living threshold between the observer and the generative forces of existence. Placement within the landscape further enhances hypnotic power. Elevated sites, valleys, riverbanks, and celestial alignment create dynamic environments that interact with the monument. Light and shadow shift with the time of day and season, producing subtle visual and perceptual changes that heighten awareness. The observer becomes attuned to flux and permanence, motion and stillness, corporeal presence and cosmic rhythm. In this way, the phallus functions as an axis around which meditation, reflection, and awe circulate, bridging temporal, social, and cosmic dimensions. Collective ritual amplifies the hypnotic and meditative effect. Communities align through procession, chant, offering, and construction, embedding meditation within social practice. Participation synchronizes attention, movement, and intention, producing shared awareness of generative forces and human mortality. Monumental phallic forms thus operate simultaneously on multiple levels: personal, communal, ritualistic, and cosmic. The observer is guided into a liminal space, immersed in sensory, symbolic, and experiential engagement, and drawn into reflection on life, death, fertility, and the continuity of human and cosmic cycles. Even when monuments fall into disuse, their symbolic and psychological resonance endures. Cultural memory, art, folklore, and architecture preserve the hypnotic and meditative qualities of the phallus. Across time and geography, the sacred shaft continues to guide consciousness, evoke awe, and align perception with the cycles of creation, mortality, and cosmic rhythm. It remains a threshold, a vessel, a teacher, and a mirror, simultaneously tangible and ethereal, historical and timeless. Approaching the monumental phallus is to encounter the weight of history, the subtle hum of generative force, and the liminal space between perception and imagination. Across continents and epochs, it serves as a portal to meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy. It teaches that creation and mortality, awe and fear, intimacy and cosmic awareness are intertwined. In this, the monumental phallus endures as a universal symbol, a hypnotic threshold, and a living conduit for human consciousness, resonating through imagination, ritual, and the collective memory of humanity. As our journey through the monumental phallus draws to a close, we are left not with answers that are finite, but with a lingering resonance, a vibration in consciousness that persists long after the monuments themselves have crumbled or been reclaimed by earth. The phallus, in its exaggerated scale and deliberate placement, transcends mere anatomy. It becomes a threshold, a liminal space in which the observer drifts between the known and the unknown, between the mortal and the eternal. Across continents, civilizations, and millennia, these sacred forms have functioned as anchors for meditation, ritual, and reflection, guiding human awareness toward forces that are at once intimate and cosmic. In Anatolia, towering stone phalli were erected in ceremonial precincts where firelight and shadow animated their surfaces, producing an eerie interplay of light and form. Pilgrims and worshippers approached with deliberate slowness, their steps synchronized with breath, heartbeat, and chant. The monuments were never mere symbols to be glanced at, they demanded immersion, attention, and reflection. The human body, in proximity to the phallus, became part of a larger rhythm, a living element in an ongoing meditation on fertility, mortality, and the cycles of creation and decay. The presence of the monumental phallus induced both awe and subtle fear, a combination that slowed thought, heightened perception, and opened the mind to the ineffable. Across the Aegean, the Minoan civilization integrated phallic symbolism into architecture, fresco, and ceremonial practice. Processions and dances traced circular and spiral patterns around the sacred monuments, echoing celestial and natural cycles. Music, chanting, and ritualized movement produced immersive experiences that drew participants into trance-like awareness. The monumental phallus was the focal point of these practices, a living conduit between body, consciousness, and cosmic rhythm. Through ritual, the observer's awareness expanded, perception deepened, and the cycles of life, death, and renewal were mirrored in the very structure of movement and space. In South Asia, the linga and yoni, in their many forms and scales, represent the duality and union of male and female, creation and manifestation. Ritual engagement, pouring water, milk, or oils, tracing the forms with hands, chanting mantras, immersed participants in a multisensory meditation. The repetition of gestures, the sensory engagement, and the alignment with cosmic principles created altered states of consciousness. In these states, participants perceived subtle currents of energy flowing through themselves and the monument, experiencing both intimacy and transcendence. The phallus, in these sacred practices, functioned as a bridge between human desire and cosmic principle, between corporeal awareness and spiritual understanding. In Africa, monumental phallic forms played both spiritual and social roles. Obelisks and fertility markers were not only sites of worship but centers of communal cohesion. The construction and maintenance of these monuments involved coordinated effort, embedding ritual significance into the social fabric. Circling the monuments, chanting, dancing, and offering created immersive experiences that engaged both body and mind. The observer experienced awe, subtle fear, and reverence, attuning to cycles of fertility, mortality, and cosmic rhythm. The monumental phallus acted as a threshold of consciousness, drawing participants into meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy. Across the Americas, pre-Columbian societies integrated phallic symbolism into landscapes, aligning markers and effigies with mountains, rivers, and celestial events. Processions, ritual offerings, and synchronized movement created immersive environments, guiding human consciousness in alignment with cosmic cycles. The phallus, monumental and exaggerated, produced a meditative resonance that slowed thought and heightened awareness. Participants engaged body, mind, and spirit, entering trance-like states in which ordinary perception dissolved and alignment with generative forces became tangible. Through these immersive rituals, the phallus functioned as both object and agent, a channel for understanding the cyclical nature of existence. The hypnotic effect of the monumental phallus derives from paradox. It embodies both permanence and impermanence, intimacy and cosmic significance, attraction and subtle fear. Observers confront mortality even as they invoke life-giving energy, achieving a state of heightened awareness that blends reverence, meditation, and subtle ecstasy. Across time and geography, this paradox is a constant, demonstrating the universal human response to forms that mediate the interplay between body, consciousness, and cosmos. The phallus, in its monumental presence, teaches that creation and mortality, awe and fear, desire and reflection are inseparably intertwined. Ritual ecstasy, when present, amplifies this meditative state. Extended ceremonies, synchronized movement, chanting, and offerings produce altered states of consciousness. Sexuality, when integrated into ritual, is symbolic rather than purely erotic, reflecting alignment with generative forces and cosmic principles. Touch, movement, and breath synchronize the human body with the rhythm of the monument, creating a liminal experience where perception expands and consciousness attunes to the cycles of life, death, and renewal. The monumental phallus functions as both mirror and conduit, drawing participants into reflection on forces that are simultaneously personal, communal, and cosmic. The phallus interaction with the landscape deepens its hypnotic resonance. Elevated sites, rivers, valleys, and celestial alignments transform the monument into a dynamic presence. Light, shadow, and seasonal change animate its surface, producing subtle perceptual shifts that heighten meditative awareness. Observers experience both permanence and flux, stability and transience, corporeal presence and cosmic rhythm. The phallus becomes not only a symbol but a living axis around which meditation, reflection, and awe circulate. Across civilizations, this alignment between monument and environment ensures that human engagement with the sacred shaft is immersive, transformative, and profoundly meditative. Communal ritual reinforces these hypnotic qualities. Synchronized movement, offering, chant, and construction produce shared awareness and collective meditation. Monumental phallic forms act as anchors for both personal and communal reflection, linking participants to generative cycles, cosmic rhythm, and social cohesion. The observer is drawn into liminal states where ordinary perception dissolves, leaving only attunement to the rhythms of life, mortality, and creation. Across continents and millennia, the phallus functions simultaneously as a tool, a mirror, and a threshold, guiding consciousness into alignment with forces larger than the individual. Even when monuments are destroyed, abandoned, or reclaimed by the earth, their resonance endures. Cultural memory, architecture, folklore, and art preserve the hypnotic and meditative power of the phallus. Across time, it continues to guide perception, evoke awe, and align consciousness with generative forces. The monumental phallus persists as both historical artifact and living symbol, bridging imagination and reality, corporeal and cosmic awareness, mortal and eternal perception. It remains a threshold through which meditation, reflection, and subtle ecstasy can be experienced. To approach the monumental phallus, in thought or imagination, is to feel the weight of history, the echo of ritual, and the subtle vibration of generative force. It draws the observer into liminal space, slowing thought, heightening perception, and guiding consciousness toward the rhythms of life, death, and cosmic alignment. Across cultures, continents, and centuries, these monuments remind us of humanity's enduring fascination with creation, fertility, and the cycles that govern existence. They are not mere relics, but living conduits of awareness, meditation, and reflection, teaching that awe, fear, intimacy, and cosmic consciousness are intertwined. The phallus hypnotic presence lingers in imagination as much as in stone. It reminds us that symbols are vessels, capable of carrying consciousness beyond the immediate, tangible, and ordinary. Through meditation, ritual, and immersive engagement, the monumental phallus has guided generations into states of reflection, ecstasy, and alignment with forces far larger than the self. Its form, exaggerated yet precise, remains a mirror of human desire, mortality, and aspiration, linking body, mind, and cosmos. As we conclude this journey, the sacred shaft endures as a threshold of contemplation, a guide to liminal states, and a conduit of subtle, meditative resonance. Across continents, civilizations, and epochs, it reminds us that human consciousness is inextricably linked to cycles of creation, mortality, and cosmic rhythm. The monumental phallus is a silent teacher, inviting reflection, awe, and immersion. Its presence, even in imagination, produces subtle vibration, drawing awareness to the eternal dance between the temporal and the infinite, between the corporeal and the cosmic, between fear, ecstasy, and reverent meditation. The phallus becomes not merely an object of history, but an axis of consciousness, a living echo of human engagement with the sacred. It embodies dualities, life and death, permanence and impermanence, intimacy and cosmic scale, inviting the observer into a liminal, hypnotic meditation on existence itself. To imagine it, to meditate upon it, is to align with cycles older than memory, to enter a rhythm beyond comprehension, and to encounter the uncanny resonance of forces that shape life, mortality, and creation. Through this journey, we are reminded that the monumental phallus, in all its forms, scales, and contexts, is a universal symbol. It transcends geography, culture, and epoch, serving as a meditative anchor, a mirror of human consciousness, and a threshold to subtle ecstasy, awe, and reflection. Its hypnotic resonance persists, guiding the mind into liminal states where ordinary thought dissolves and perception aligns with the rhythms of existence, revealing the profound connection between body, consciousness, and cosmos.